Hello guys. Okay, so today I just thought I'd create a quick video, or rather audio feed, where I'm going to explain to you why gang stalking is not a form of mental illness and should not be confused with any form of mental illness. Now, it's very difficult for people who are actually targets of this system, precisely because when they do try to elicit help from the various organisations which are ostensibly set up to assist people who are being harassed, they inevitably run into this brick wall where they're simply assumed to be crazy, or assumed to be suffering from a mental health issue, such as, for example, paranoid schizophrenia. Excuse me. Now, there are various ways where one can differentiate between paranoid schizophrenia and the actual the physical practice of being gang stalked, but essentially, that I really only need to mention one thing, and that's the specifics of the situation, the specifics of the tactics which are used against the victims of gang stalking, because they're ubiquitous. They're the same wherever this program is being used. Across the country where you're living in currently, but also across the entire world. In various countries, they use the exact same systems of harassment to mess with people. Specifically, I'll mention what I believe are the two main components of gang stalking, which are the two aspects which every target seems to experience at some point. And the first of those is the one headlight harassment. Everywhere a target goes, they will be continuously passed, or they will, within their line of sight, they will continuously see vehicles which have got one headlight out, either one headlight out completely, or there will be one headlight which is severely out of balance with the other. This is a deliberate tactic which is designed to let targets know that they're being monitored, they're being followed, and they're being watched. It's I live in the UK, as whoever's followed me might possibly know by now, but this exact same tactic is being used in the United States. It's being used in Europe, France, Germany. It's being used in Australia, New Zealand. It's the number one most common tactic which every victim of gang stalking reports. So clearly, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or Albert Einstein to kind of think to yourself, well, perhaps there's something to this if all these complete strangers who are living in completely different parts of the world are all reporting the exact same specific tactic which is being used to harass them. People who suffer from illnesses such as paranoid schizophrenia tend to have more vague claims, or if they do get specific, those specific claims and the specific experiences which they report to have differ considerably between different sufferers of the illness. So, for example, you might have one sufferer of paranoid schizophrenia who might claim that he's aliens are watching him wherever he goes. There might be another sufferer who might report that there are demons after him and the devil speaking to him. You might have another sufferer who might say that it's government surveillance. But even when these claims about government surveillance are made, they generally tend to be fairly vague. With victims of gang stalking, as I've tried to explain, they're very specific in reporting the tactics which are being used against them. And also, bear in mind that not everybody necessarily automatically jumps to the conclusion that it's government who are responsible for this program. I mean, that's kind of just a process of elimination, really, as to who would have the resources, the funds, the time to conduct something like this. But not everybody speculates that far. Many targets just actually report what they're experiencing, and as I say, the number one tactic which is being used against victims of gang stalking is that they repeatedly encounter vehicles with one headlight out of balance or one headlight off completely, and that is, as I say, that's ubiquitous. That's right across the world, wherever the victim happens to be. These exact same tactics are being used, and also with this particular tactic, it's visual, so it's something which the victim can actually record on either on a mobile phone or an independent camera, so that they can record this actually happening and they can post these incidents. So again, you don't need to be a rocket scientist. That if you just jump onto YouTube and have a look at exactly how many different people across the world have posted evidence of these vehicles being used to harass them, you don't have to be, a genius to realize that, well, perhaps there's something going on here, because it seems to be awfully odd that all these thousands of different people are reporting the exact same harassment tactic wherever they happen to be in the world. The second most common tactic in my experience of victims of gang stalking is the fake coughing. So wherever a target goes, be it around people they know already or in a situation where they're encountering complete strangers, they will be continuously harassed by people who do a very overt fake cough around them, and that will be done continuously, and it's done purposely to cause the target to feel paranoid. That's why it's done. This program is very clever, because not only does it try to mimic the symptoms of mental illness, but it also tries to manufacture them in the target. So if you just imagine, if you're not a victim of this yourself, if you can just imagine everywhere that you go on a daily basis, wherever it happens to be, and everyone that you encounter in your normal day-to-day activities is doing an overtly fake cough in front of you repeatedly, it's going to confuse you, and eventually it's going to cause you to become paranoid. You're going to associate the coughing with the feeling of being harassed. It's going to elicit negative feelings in you, and that's exactly why they do it. They do it so that eventually the target will harass themselves. Every time they'll hear a person cough, it will automatically bring up negative feelings in them, and that's why it's done. The people who are doing this, they're versed in the behavioural sciences, they're versed in psychology, and they know exactly what they're doing to you. It's deliberate. They're not doing it. Although it seems bizarre, there's a method behind the madness. Now, those two aspects, and the fact that every or almost every single victim of this program seems to report these two aspects, is a very strong indication that it's not a form of mental illness, because mental illness varies widely. What people believe when they're mentally ill, it varies widely. There might be concurrent themes running through it, such as government surveillance. That would certainly be one of them. However, when you get into the specifics and the claims being made by people who are mentally ill, and are reporting these particular things, what you'll find is that what they report will vary widely. Whereas the victims of gang stalking, they're all reporting the exact same things. Let's not forget that there's a documented history of governments engaging in these sorts of practices. We had COINTELPRO, which was run by the FBI, which was an illegal program geared against the civil rights activists and the civil rights movement in the United States, and it was virtually exactly the same thing. It was a protest where people were stalked, they were harassed, they were encouraged to commit suicide. It was exactly the same program run at an early era. And of course, we also had the Stasi's program in former East Germany, the Zersetzung, which was again a very similar program where people that the state felt were would potentially go on to become dissidents. So it was largely preemptive. The people who the state felt profiled as potential future dissidents, they would be attacked with this exact same protocol. Like I say, the specifics might have varied in that particular program, but essentially it was exactly the same thing. It was a process where numerous people would gang up against them in a form of what is essentially bullying, and that's essentially what the gang stalking program is. It's a form of state bullying, where numerous people are sent to lower the quality of life of one particular individual for reasons which are generally unknown to that individual. But if we do take into account that it's very probably the state who are behind it, then it's presumably either for anti-state activities, anti-state opinions, or that the state feels that you have the potential to go on to hold those opinions or commit to those activities. So I hope I've given you good cause to question whether gang stalking is in fact a mental illness, as you will no doubt read about if you look at the main sites such as Wikipedia, or there's a famous article in the New York Times which just lambasts people who are reporting this particular activity. And as somebody who is trained specifically to think critically, I'm able to look at that information and not necessarily take it at face value. And that would be true even if I wasn't a victim of being gang stalked. I might not necessarily have the motivation to look into it more deeply, but I've certainly been trained to do that, and to give you some examples. In fact, to go into a little bit more detail. Because this is interesting, because there are certain sites which are reporting that the victims of this are experiencing persecutory delusions, and that's all that it really is. And I think it's imperative that we look into this into a little bit more detail. Now, for example, Wikipedia, as you probably know, Wikipedia can be edited by anybody who creates an account and decides to do that. However, what needs to be bear in mind is that in reality, Wikipedia isn't edited that way. Certainly, you can log on and you can edit a page, but if it has a hierarchy just like everywhere else in life, and if the people at the higher end of that hierarchy don't agree with what you've written in the particular article which you've edited, then it will be changed very rapidly. And if you continue to edit it, even if you're in the right, if you continue to edit that article and it's not being agreed with by the people who are above you in that Wikipedia hierarchy, then eventually your account will be banned. Any politically sensitive topic on Wikipedia generally runs to what the government's narrative is. If you read a good example will be the 9/11 page, because if you read Wikipedia's 9/11 page, it essentially just parrots the government's narrative. And of course, anybody who's done any research into the topic is fully aware that there's a wealth of scientific evidence which draws the government's narrative into quite serious question. None of that evidence is included on the Wikipedia page, because essentially speaking, Wikipedia is controlled by state interests and special interest groups. Wasn't always necessarily that way. It began with the best of intentions, and for a number of years it was a good site, but over the course of the last certainly the last decade, it's gradually been taken over, because it's such a common household name that power would be stupid not to try and elicit some sort of control over that particular website. So Wikipedia obviously does try to reference the information that it provides, but again, you need to look into these references and whether they do actually create the same story that the page itself is trying to create. A good one is that with the Wikipedia page for gang stalking, I've had a look at some of their references. One of them is to a Washington Post article called Mind Games, which is actually a very balanced article. It doesn't outright deny the accounts of people who claim that they're targeted individuals, but that seems to be the way that the reference has been used within the Wikipedia article. Another big one is the New York Times article, which again, as I say, completely lambasts the idea that the government would ever run a program of this nature, even though it's been documented to have happened several times before in the past. But essentially, it's very critical of targeted individuals and their claims, and again, it just tries to create the message that we're all just absolutely crazy, there's nothing to this, we're all just paranoid schizophrenics, which the numbers alone would dispute, because there are far more people who are reporting that they're targets of this program than can be explained by the ordinary numbers that could be expected, or which would be expected to be diagnosed with an illness such as paranoid schizophrenia. But the New York Times articles is essentially a whitewash. It doesn't really include any contrary opinions. It decides what the narrative's going to be at the beginning of the article, and it continues very much along that vein for the rest of the article. The New York Times itself has a documented reputation for printing misinformation and or disinformation, particularly during the Vietnam War. I'd recommend the writing of people like Noam Chomsky and also Ed Herman, who go into great detail about how the new excuse me, about how the New York Times specifically was used as an avenue for misinformation during the Vietnam War. In fact, I watched an old news article. Sorry, a clip from a news program rather on YouTube a few weeks ago, and it was an interview with an ex-CIA employee, and he was talking about how they manipulate the media with false information by effectively creating relationships with journalists, which they then exploit. They might give a journalist a couple of pieces of information which turn out to be verifiable and true, and then on the third occasion they might slip the misinformation, and can be fairly sure that will end up in print. And during this interview that I saw with this ex-CIA employee, he mentioned the New York Times specifically by name. The other big one, the one which in fact, let's slow down a second. What I need to make clear here is that there's an absolute absence of any serious academic study of gang stalking, or the symptoms reported by people who claim to be experiencing gang stalking. There's virtually there's no research which has been done on it at all. The only there are a couple of exceptions. The one which is generally quoted because it's critical of the idea of gang stalking, and tends to blame paranoid delusions on the part of the victim, is the Sheridan and James study. Now, the one thing which isn't usually, I mean, it's quoted a lot, it's quoted in the Wikipedia article, it's quoted a lot by kind of skeptics of the idea of gang stalking, but one thing which it generally isn't either known by the people who quote it, or they simply just don't bother to mention it, is that study isn't peer reviewed. I mean, essentially the basis of it was an anonymous questionnaire which was passed out to various people who claimed to be reporting themselves as victims of gang stalking. And of course, the one of the most famous lines which is used is that the conductors of the study decide that arbitrarily the experiences being reported are highly consistent with delusions. But of course, the survey which they're basing those conclusions on was anonymous. They don't know any of the people who participated in the study personally. They don't know anything about their backgrounds. They don't know anything about their personal experiences. They're just essentially making a guess on what those people are reporting. So there's a very wide gap between the data which is going in and the conclusions which are coming out. But you'll find that, like I say, that if you do dig below the surface, that most of the literature which does claim that gang stalking is just simply a case of people reporting persecutory delusions, it's severely flawed. Because it is a real program. Anybody who's experienced it for themselves knows it's a real program, and of course it's extremely frustrating being a victim of it, and being told to go to see a psychiatrist whenever you try to reach out for help from anybody. I mean, I do believe it's the state who are behind it, but of course it's going on in every single country, so it can't just be one state. It has to be some sort of there must be some sort of agreement. It most likely was exported through the United States government. That's my personal opinion. But again, like I say, nobody has the time, the resources, or the funding to be able to. I mean, assuming that it is actually happening, and assuming you buy my explanation that it isn't just mental illness, that nobody else would really have the resources, the time, or would produce the effort to run a program like this, in my opinion, other than the state. So I personally do believe that's who's behind it, and also the kind of the cleverness of the program is another indication that it's the state who are involved, because, like I say, I mean, it's unlikely that any kind of criminal organisation would have access to behavioural scientists and psychologists who could create the best way to harass somebody covertly without it necessarily becoming public knowledge. But the weaknesses in the program are the two tactics I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, which are the one headlight harassment and to a lesser extent the coughing. I say to a lesser extent the coughing because it's more difficult to actually record, and it's also more difficult to differentiate between somebody who is coughing as a result of a cold, or they have a sore throat or whatever, and something which is being done to harass another individual. So that leaves us with the one headlight harassment, which is a visual anomaly that can and has been recorded by pretty much every victim of this program, and the evidence of it is splashed all across the internet. If you just go into Google or DuckDuckGo and just type in one headlight harassment tactic, you'll find thousands of different videos from different people who are all reporting exactly the same tactic which is being used to harass them. So like I say, it's very unlikely that that's one big coincidence. Thousands of different people who are all reporting this exact same tactic being used against them. It's almost statistically impossible for that to be a coincidence. There must be something more to it. In any case, I'll leave it there. I've spoken enough. You're probably sick of my voice by now. I'll try to create some more videos in the future, but yeah, this was just a quick video to see if I could try and explain the differences between mental illness and gang stalking. In fact, sorry, before I go, let me just touch over something which which I largely forgot to mention during this video. In cases of schizophrenia specifically, I mean, there are other delusional mental illnesses, but the one which is generally quoted as being that the victims of gang stalking are suffering from, with regards to that specific illness, then as a general rule, sufferers become symptomatic before the age of 30, and that's true for both men and women. And what you'll find is a large percentage of people who claim that they're being gang stalked, their gang stalking started well into middle age, and in some instances into their senior years, so over 60. Personally, I believe I was 42 when I first noticed symptoms of gang stalking. No medical history of psychosis or delusional mental illness prior to that, and that's a similar story among most of the, well, I don't know about most of, but certainly a large percentage of people who are reporting being victims of gang stalking. It starts after the window where the symptoms of schizophrenia would usually manifest themselves. In any case, like I say, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your time. Have a nice evening. Bye bye.